Hi everyone. So I haven't had time to make videos recently, but I've been going to the cinema a lot, and I think this has been a great year with many wonderful films. There is one film that has really stayed with me, and that's Anatomie of a Fall, which I feel just gets better and better the more you think about it. The film has already been analysed many times, but here I want to focus on elements that have particularly caught my fancy and that maybe have not been analysed so much. There has been a lot of talk and many jokes about the 50 Cent's instrumental cover used in the film, and throughout the film, the music and the sound are clearly very important. The one thing I don't really see much about and that I really want to talk about are the piano pieces. There's a lot of piano playing throughout the movie, but only two pieces are played. One is Asturias by Albéniz, and the other one is Chopin's Prelude in E minor. Asturias is only ever played by Daniel, and most of the time it's actually Milo playing. If you play the piano like me, you probably played it as it's a popular piece, especially for children. And it's a really interesting choice. First, because the pattern of the notes, the first thing I noticed when I heard it is that there is a fall in it.
So if you do only the left hand, it goes like this. And so this highlight here is the first note of the measure, and it's a drop really. You go up and low, and then actually gets lower because then you go. And then it's replaced with something even more dramatic. So you see this chord is actually very hard to do because you have to jump very fast and then go back and forth. It really sounds like a drop, like a fall, and it gets even more dramatic.
I don't know if they did that on purpose. I'd say they probably did. At the beginning of the film, it's precisely this last low fall that Daniel is struggling with. There's always a slight delay. And the title of the film appears at the exact moment when he finally hits that note. So what I mean is this music, it really places this emphasis on the fall. It's also a piece that sounds quite dramatic and also quite angry, so it's quite fitting for the film and for Daniel too. And as the film goes on, he's getting more and more comfortable playing the piece, which seems to be a way to convey how Daniel is maturing first, but also how he's maybe arranging his messy story in his head and putting everything together so things can work. At least that's my interpretation. Then you have the Chopin Prelude, but it's not the regular version of this prelude. It's a four hands version of the piece, and this is very significant. I think this is genius, actually. For those who are not pianists, in a four hands piece, one person plays the accompanying part, which is usually the lower part with complex chords. And the other plays the melody, which is usually the higher part and a little simpler most of the time. The first time we hear the piece in the film, we see Daniel playing, and Sandra joins him and sits down silently and starts playing this piece, and then he joins in. And for me, four hands piano is such a wonderful way to signify an intimate connection. Very often you will play such pieces with a family member, with someone who's very close to you, and it requires a connection and ability to commune through the music. But in this first scene, you can tell the connection has been damaged. Sandra is the one who initiates the piece. Daniel was playing Asturias, but she comes near him and starts playing the first note of her part. And he follows through, although a bit reluctantly. You can see in his body he's a bit tense and a bit angry. I see this as symbolizing her wish to reconnect with her son, and he tries to respond, but eventually he's the one that breaks the connection. He seems to have some anger towards his mum, or at least some unresolved anger that he doesn't know how to deal with. And I have also noticed that the low part of the piano, the four hands piece, again seems to be associated with the dead father, which would mean that in that moment maybe Daniel is a stand-in for Samuel in a way. On rewatch, it seems to me that the film even goes further. Playing the piano seems to be a way for Daniel to connect to his dead father, who is now beyond the reach of simple words. More generally, Samuel is represented as a voiceless man in the film. He is voiceless in two ways at least, the most obvious one being that he's dead and he can no longer speak for himself. The other, slightly less obvious one, as a failed writer, he was reduced to silence, while Sandra was putting their lives into words for the whole world to read. Therefore, Samuel's voice is only relayed by other characters, like the psychiatrist, for example. But in my opinion, The music is also Samuel's voice in the film. In the opening scene, while he's still alive, we do not see him, and the only way his presence and his annoyance is manifested is through the music suddenly playing very loud. We are repeatedly told that Samuel was someone who constantly played loud music, except this one time in the car when he was actually trying to tell Daniel something important. But even then, he only did it by hiding his words' true meaning, by talking about the dog instead. At least that's Daniel's interpretation of it. Throughout the film, Samuel is only ever shown with no voice, as a photograph, for example, so by definition silent, or as a video, but also with no sound. The only time when we hear his voice is during the argument scene because there was a recording. And hearing his voice and his side of the story in what is apparently a rare moment of sincerity and rebellion on his part is a shock to everyone. To go back to the piano, Daniel's almost obsessive way of playing Asturias and the way he struggles at first, while we see a picture of his dad at the same time, almost seems like he's trying to reach out to his dead father through music. And his reaction to Sandra joining him and changing the tune seems to suggest that he sees that as an interference in this quest, in a way maybe foreshadowing his later decision to ask her to leave the house so he can figure out what he believes. And precisely during that part of the film, the piano is used again in a very interesting way. The Chopin piece comes up again, but this time Daniel is alone, having kicked his mother out of the house as he prepares to testify. He starts playing the Chopin piece, but he does not play the same part as before. This time he plays his mother's part, the high notes. I see this as symbolizing his attempt to reconnect with his mother and maybe accept her side of the story. But then there is a dramatic crescendo in the music, and this time it cuts to another scene, and it's only the low notes this time that we hear. And as we hear them, we see Daniel walking through the attic, which was pretty much his father's territory. And therefore, I feel the low notes are really meant to be associated with his dad. I wonder actually if maybe it's meant to imply that Samuel was also playing, used to play with maybe with Daniel, or maybe they had this ritual of playing together. Maybe Sandra knows a bit of the piece, but I don't know, maybe I'm reaching here. But anyway, I feel the low notes are meant to be associated with Samuel, and Daniel is about to side with his mother in the trial here, but he's not betraying his dad. He's trying to reach out to his spirit one last time by walking through this attic, and then we hear the low notes of this piece blasting. And then in the key testimony he gives, the brilliant editing makes it look as if he is speaking instead of his father. So again, in a way, a connection through sound where Daniel is a stand-in for his father in a way. Doubles everywhere. Samuel and Snoop. The film's ambiguity is also built to the use of doubles everywhere, literally everywhere. The most obvious one is that the dog is meant to be Samuel's double. This has been confirmed by Justine Triet, but from the moment you first notice it, it becomes really easy to make a list of parallels. First, the dog is the first creature we actually see in the movie, and he follows a falling bull down the stairs, which is clear foreshadowing. The dog is also the one who finds Samuel's body. And then later on, there is the episode when Daniel gives his dog aspirin and the dog vomits, just like Samuel presumably took aspirin and vomited, so that parallel is very obvious. The way Daniel cradles Snoops after almost killing him with aspirin is a clear parallel to the scene in which he found his dead father's body as well. Then, of course, there is that key flashback at the end when Daniel remembers Samuel talking about the dog being tired of life and that he would have to let him go eventually. And his interpretation is that his dad was pretending to talk about the dog, but was really talking about himself and his own suicidal tendencies. So another very obvious parallel. And finally, in the very last scene, Sandra is reunited with her dog, and it seems like a metaphor for the way she's reintegrated into her home and her family. But the way the dog lies in bed beside her and she hugs him lovingly, it also makes it seem like she's metaphorically reunited with her husband, whom she always said she loved in spite of all their troubles. Name doubles, blurring the line between life and fiction. The pattern of the double is also used in other ways. The blurring of the line between fiction and reality is one major theme of the film, and it's really interesting to see that Justine Triet and Arthur Harari, who wrote the film together, chose to name their characters based on real-life names. Sandra Voiter and Samuel Maliski have both been named after the actors playing them, Sandra Hüller and Samuel Thees. In addition to this, I was wondering why other characters were not treated the same way. For example, why they chose Vincent for the lawyer. And then I read an interview in which Justine Triet mentions that they worked with a legal advisor called Maître Vincent Courcelles-Labrousse. So Vincent actually also has a real life double. So I think this decision to use real life names for the fictional characters of the story is meant to reflect one of the main themes of the film, which is how difficult it can be to separate life from fiction. Of course, many people have pointed out that Justine Triet and Arthur Harari, who wrote the film together, are also a couple of writers, so they kept asking them if there was an autobiographical element to the film, and although they kept laughing it off and saying, well, hopefully not, it's clear that they enjoy playing around with this. As for Danielle, I could not find a real life double to explain the choice of the first name. The actor is called Milo, as you probably know, so I don't know if you have any suggestions. Maybe you have an idea, maybe I missed something. But I did find an article in French. It made a very convincing argument that the name was a reference to The Shining, because like the child from The Shining, Daniel seems to have very special gifts that make him perceive things others cannot see. And he also has a similar haircut. The story also features a writer struggling to write and going to a remote location in the snow to try and find inspiration. I think they're probably onto something there. So I think this article builds a convincing case that Daniel Maliski's double is Danny Torrance. So that's not a real life double, it's a cinematic reference. And finally, when talking of doubles, to go back to Vincent, I would say he is also meant to be, in a way, Samuel's double. First, there's an obvious physical resemblance. They have almost the same hair, and Justine Trier has confirmed in an interview that it was deliberate. And second, they both are men who do not really match the image of a manly man, or stereotypically manly man, and it was deliberately done. In the couple formed by Sandra and Samuel, the traditional gender roles are reversed. It is Sandra who pursues her career, while Samuel feels that he's being dragged down by household chores and taking care of his son. In creating the character of Vincent, Justine Trier explained that she wanted to break away from the stereotypical depiction of lawyers as super manly men with big voices who turn trials into sorts of dogfights. And so Swan Arlo explained that she was constantly telling him to kind of hold his horses, to downplay everything. Every time he was tempted to go big and to match the energy that Antoine Reynards, the one playing the prosecutor, was giving him, she would say, no, no, go smaller. And by the way, they were both nominated for Best Supporting Actor in the French César, the equivalent of the Oscars in France. And it was Swan who won. And I saw comments saying that Antoine's performance should have won because it was more compelling or more spectacular. And while I do think Antoine Reynard gave an amazing performance, and he's not just chewing the scenery, he still manages to infuse some subtlety in it. But I think it can be really hard also to give a more restrained performance. And haters gonna hate and so on, but I saw a couple of comments that said that all Swan Arlo did in the film was stand there and look pretty. And I think that's really ignoring the hard work that goes into this kind of performance. In particular, I really love the way he gives subtle cues of Vincent's lack of self-confidence and in his voice inflections and micro expressions. For example, those scenes when he's talking to the journalists, he's trying to look self-assured, but he's not really succeeding at this, and really that takes some work. It's not the way he usually talks. If you watch some of his speeches in real life as himself, not in character, you will see there's a huge difference between the way he normally speaks in public and the way he speaks in the film. So this is work. This is not just him being himself there. And so Justine Trier actually said she deliberately went for an actor who is known for his ability to show vulnerability, and although he does have a certain strength of a different kind, but we could say that both Vincent and Samuel share this trait. Vincent is also obviously a double in that he's both possibly a former rival, and also there's a hint that he might be a future replacement for Samuel in time. This shot in particular has a bit of an uncanny character with Vincent looking up, almost as if he was a mirror image of Samuel's fall. And also, look at how noticeable his shadow is on the white snow, almost as if it was the shadow of the other man, almost as if it were Samuel's ghostly presence there. They are also both shown eating spaghetti with Sandra in the kitchen, which might seem silly, but I don't think it's a coincidence in a movie like this one, which is just filled with echoes and parallels. And that leads me to my last point, which is that ambiguity in this film is not just in the refusal to give us a final truth about whether Sandra is guilty or not, but also in how it manages to extend this ambiguity to other areas of the film as well. And the best example of that, in my opinion, is the relationship between Vincent and Sandra. Vincent and Sandra's relationship, a masterpiece of ambiguity. So the genius of the writing here is in the refusal to give us anything but a few scraps of information about the nature of their relationship. And again, that was a deliberate choice made by Justine Triet. Not only did she write the script in this way, but she even made the choice of removing several scenes that were really wonderful, but that somehow damaged this ambiguity or this mystery. So basically, all we know is they have known each other for a very long time, and they like each other very much. She trusts him enough to basically put her life in his hands, and he cares for her enough to accept to take on this enormous, daunting task, even though it's probably a bad idea. I think most lawyers will tell you that you should never accept to defend someone who's very close to you, especially if you're probably in love with them. But of their former relationship, we won't ever know anything more. Are they exes? Was he a spurned lover? Did he also build a life with someone else during these 15 odd years that they didn't talk? We don't really get the slightest hint that this is the case. He seems to be still in love with her, even though he doesn't say it. And the most incredible scene that deals with this ambiguity and mystery between them is when they're getting drunk and talking in the snow. And it seems like a relaxed moment, and in the original cut it really was. There was a lot more laughing and drinking and joking and even some kissing. But in the final cut, it's really imbued with much more gravity. You feel it's relaxed, and at the same time there is tension there. And really, if you can get your hands on the DVD extras, there is the original version of that scene, which is almost 7 minutes long, and they talk about how difficult it was to make the decision to cut most of it, as it was a wonderful scene, and it really was. Swanalo jokes that they kept telling him it was the most amazing acting he'd done in the movie, only later to inform him that actually most of it had been cut. But it really was very good, and what I find really fascinating when comparing this original scene to the final cut is how it highlights the role of editing, and how Justine Triet really just used this as raw material to tell a story, but the editing really completely changed the meaning of some of these lines. When you see the original scene that was much longer, the vibe was very different, and Justine Triet actually says it feels almost the opposite, precisely because the new version is so much drier and so much more ambiguous. So I'm going to dwell on that scene a bit because I find it fascinating in every way, the writing, the editing, and also the acting. So first there's this moment when out of the blue he tells her she looks like a dog.
You look like a dog. No, a beautiful dog, you know, how do you say, un basset.
And that's yet another interesting parallel between dogs and humans. And since this scene is clearly about Vincent flirting with Sandra, I wonder if that's not meant to signify that she is actually still Samuel's mate in a way, since we saw that Snoop was Samuel's double. So in a way he's a dog and she's also a dog, so they go together. And Vincent seems to be trying to figure out if there might be an opening there, if Sandra might still have feelings for him too, but the signs are not very encouraging. The fact that she looks like a dog to him could be a way to signify that it's too soon, that she's still Samuel's. But what's even more interesting is that in return her response is yet another moment of great ambiguity. First, she pretends to be offended, as you would be if a guy tried to compliment you by saying you look like a dog, I guess. But then she tells him she's okay with him calling her a dog because she can't trust someone unless she can put an animal's head on them.
It's funny you say that. I can't trust someone if I can't put an animal's head on them.
But then he immediately calls her out on this and asks,
So, what am I?
Not sure yet.
and this is a great way to signify her insecurity towards him, and clearly it hurts him a little. Then it leads to a discussion of their relationship, although they're mostly beating around the bush, except in that one line which seems like a sudden truth bomb which he drops on her when he casually says,
And I was hopelessly in love.
I thought that was genius, because at this point you're trying to figure out, you kind of figured out that there was something between them, you see the way he looks at her, you think he might actually still be in love, and we don't really know if Sandra knew or if he's just dropped this big revelation onto her. And that's another interesting decision by Justine Triet, because in the longer version of that scene there's a much clearer suggestion that they did in fact date at some point. The line Sandra says, I don't remember a thing. That was originally framed as a joke, and then Vincent gets a bit flustered and jokingly says, well, thank you very much. And Sandra's reaction suggests that she actually does remember and she was just teasing him. So there is a stronger suggestion, I would say, that they dated. But in the final cut, by removing this bit, Justine Triet changed the meaning of that line, and now it really does seem as if Sandra is serious when she says she can't remember.
Can't remember a thing.
So we're left with this mystery, and Vincent is also left with this mystery to interpret as he will. And then this leads into a far more serious discussion of how uncomfortable she is with his refusal to discuss the question of the truth.
But I'm innocent, you know that, right?
Yes.
I don't know what you're thinking, really.
Until then, he seemed to really keep his card very close to his chest, and that is another interesting source of mystery for the audience, his refusal to even consider the question of the truth. It can be seen as him trying to act professional. You can tell he's a bit worried about his ability to defend her, that he's not such a good lawyer. He's a good lawyer, but he's not super good. So he feels a bit overwhelmed and insecure about this. And in the end, he's absolutely right that this is not what matters in a trial. What matters is your ability to convince people. But at the same time, it's also quite convenient for him to hide behind this principle as a way to protect himself from getting too embroiled in his feelings for Sandra. And it could be that he's afraid to really consider the possibility of her being guilty, that he would rather not know, especially if he's hoping to reconnect with her at some point. But even more interesting, in my opinion, it could be that he doesn't want to articulate this one embarrassing truth, that it's not just because it's the right strategy that he does not want to discuss this. He doesn't want to discuss it because he doesn't care about the truth either. And the reason behind this is that he's still in love with her, and so he would defend her unconditionally, whether she's guilty or not. But that's something that he's probably not ready to admit. So in a way, Vincent is faced with a similar choice to that of Danielle, except that instead of choosing one option over the other, which is what Danielle needs, he needs certainty of some kind, and if he cannot have it, he will make it up. Vincent, on the other hand, he prefers to avoid the question. But in a way, his reply does not completely erase the doubt. All it does is reassure her about his unconditional support.
Sandra, I believe you. I'm not judging you.
And her attitude towards him is also ambiguous. We never really know whether she really has feelings for him that go beyond friendship or not. She's probably confused as well, and as I've already mentioned, in the original script there was a kiss between them. It was even filmed before they chose to eventually remove it. And all that is left is this conversation in the snow that looks a lot like flirting, and the restaurant scene where they get physically close but they never cross that line. And actually, I have to tell you this story. The film is clearly teasing us there because there is this mounting sexual or romantic tension, at least, between them. And we're wondering whether they're going to kiss or not. We see they're getting a bit drunk. There's the fact that the trial is over and they're relaxing. And also Vincent probably feels it's kind of his last chance to do something. So they're teasing us very clearly. And originally, as I've already said, they kissed in the snow scene, but Justine Triet said that there were bad reactions from the test audiences. So they made that scene way shorter and they decided not to include the kiss. And funnily enough, I was able to witness that firsthand. I've seen the film 3 times in the movie theatre, and for my 3rd viewing, I was sitting next to a group of 3 young women, very young, I'd say in their early 20s. And these girls were going bananas next to me, not during the snow scene, but during the car scene, and especially the restaurant scene that comes after it. It was especially funny as unlike them, I knew there would be no kiss, but they could clearly feel the tension and they were completely going mad over this and they completely objected to the idea of a kiss. So from the car scene, I could hear them whisper angrily, "Oh, no, she's so going to bang her." And then another one going, no way, he's way too handsome for her. I don't agree with this, by the way. I think they look great together. And then during the restaurant scene, they were completely losing it. And when he touched her face, they were going like, see, they're going there. No. And after watching Sandra glance Vincent's face without kissing him, I heard one of them say, seriously, who does that? So yeah, apparently the kiss wouldn't have gone down well with certain people in the audience. So we never really know how Sandra feels about Vincent. Whether maybe she's actually using him a little because she knows he cares so much about her. Is it a bit calculated here, or does she really feel something for him? She seems a little unsure herself, but her insistence on knowing what he truly believes suggests that she cares enough about him to care about his good opinion. But more seriously, one last thing I want to say about this is one of the most interesting things about this film, in my opinion, is that it makes everyone question their own misogynistic biases. And in this case, it made me wonder about my own bias, because thinking about this choice of not having Sandra and Vincent kiss or consummate that relationship, I felt that in a way, if she had kissed him, it would have made her look more guilty to me. And it's silly, I know, but I guess it would have invoked this cliche of the woman who kills her husband so she can, bang her hot lawyer. It makes no sense because she didn't know that he was still in love with her and they hadn't spoken in years, but they clearly didn't plan this together. But still, I think it would have given this impression. And it might have given the impression that she didn't care as much about her dead husband as well, even though, again, it's silly to think that people move on. It doesn't mean they don't care, but it would have given that impression. I think it would have tipped the balance a bit more towards believing that she's guilty. And in fact, I recently saw a statement by Sandra Hüller in which she said she regretted that the whole did she kill him or not question had kind of erased the fact that Sandra is grieving for Samuel. And I read all this talk of her being cold or unlikable, but really, once again, I think there's a strong misogynistic bias here. If you watch the film carefully, there are lots of hints at her grief and at the fact that in spite of all their issues, she did love Samuel. First, there is the crying, and you have that scene in which she watches videos of him, even though I agree we're left to imagine how she feels inside. You can interpret that in different ways, I guess. Then you have that "you look like a dog" comment from Vincent as well, which, as I've said, seems to me that it's a way to notice, to remark that she's still Samuel's. There's also the way that she tries to stand up for Samuel's reputation. She tells Vincent she doesn't want to stoop to that level of, dirting his reputation. And again, in the trial, once Vincent gives this big speech in which he paints Samuel as a desperate man who took his own life, she says softly, "That wasn't Samuel." So she doesn't want to see Samuel painted as a pathetic man. And finally, of course, you have that final shot where Sandra's lying in Samuel's bed with Snoop once it's all over. And as we said before, Snoop is Samuel's double, so the end of the film is her reuniting with her husband's spirit. In fact, although we hardly ever see him, Samuel's presence is constantly felt in many ways, through the piano, through pictures, through the dog as his double, through strange echoes in Vincent's behavior. There is still Samuel's lingering presence there between them. And sometimes it makes me feel as if I'm watching a ghost story, in fact. There is something a bit uncanny about this shot especially. It seems as if a third person is watching them through the window. And it's probably not just me, because Swan Arlo said in an interview, it's a radio interview in French, so not available unfortunately, that during filming he was staying in a cabin, a bit like the one in the film, a very large one, and he was staying there alone, and he felt like there were ghosts around, and he said that he locked his bedroom door at night because of that. He felt a bit uneasy. And one of the scenes that were cut was in fact the scene with the psychic that is mentioned by Monica in the final cut, but we don't get to see him in the film. And it was a very strange scene, and I'm happy they cut it because it would have been way, way too on the nose in my opinion. But still, it shows that this presence of the uncanny element, the kind of supernatural element, was something that was supposed to be there. It's just that the final cut is just more subtle about it, but it is definitely there. So really, I could keep talking about this for hours, but for me, the genius of this film is really about how they managed to give us enough information in terms of characterization to make us care about these characters who are really the center of the film. It's not a whodunit, really, it's about people. But at the same time, they withhold just enough information that you are kept constantly wondering what's really going on. And the way the personal is intertwined with the professional here is particularly interesting. It just keeps raising more and more questions, which only raise the stake in the trial. You can just feel that Vincent is afraid that he will let her down. He's trying to remain professional, but it's quite visible that he's emotionally involved. So it just raises so many questions about both the relationship and the way the trial is going. So I'm realizing that this analysis has in fact focused on pretty much everything but the trial itself, because the trial is riveting, but what really matters is everything else around it. And this is why this movie is so beautiful, and I would be delighted if it created a huge surprise by winning one or several Oscars on Sunday. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.